Warning, this content may be offensive, upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Cops of Reddit, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to and what happened? Working third shift on Halloween night, I'm out by one of our smaller lakes just outside the city limits. Kids love to go out and drink, which is surrounded by some very nice houses. Going through the neighborhood, each of the roads enters a small two-lane road that surrounds the lake. I'm slowing to the stop sign and already starting to look to my right to make the turn when my headlights start tracing the rock wall that surrounds the lake. I catch something out of the corner of my eye in one of the large trees that dots the walking path. I back up to see what it was, and I see a guy hanging. At first, I thought it was a Halloween decoration. The neighborhood is real into decorating for every holiday. So I stop, get out, and as soon as my flashlight hits him, I realize, nope, no decoration. He dead. As I'm standing there getting ready to call it in, I notice a gaggle of kids coming down the street trick-or-treating. As soon as they see my car, they start heading my way faster, so I book it back up the block to meet the parent walking with them and tell her she needs to take the long way around the block the other way. She can see it on my face, I'm not kidding. Turns out he was a 20-year-old that was devastated about his girlfriend breaking up with him, and she lived in the last house on that block, where she would see him the next morning when she looked out her window. We responded to a burglary alarm at a mortuary and found that one of the rear doors was left open. The policy now dictates that the entire building needs to be cleared, searched, to confirm that it was a false alarm, which most are. It's the middle of the night and totally dark. We use flashlights and never turn on the lights. We walk into one of the rooms and see a body on a table. It appeared that it was waiting to be processed, possibly embalmed, by the mortician. It smelled like a mildly decomposing body. Suddenly I see a shadow to my right and I shine my light there and find nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately smell a really strong whiff of perfume blow by me. The search was completed more expeditiously than normal after that. Nothing was found. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone, and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out the top of her neck, and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving, but needed tons of plastic surgery. My uncle was a sergeant and had to be called several times out to a house for domestic abuse. This older guy had some young 18 years old. He would pay for the guy to swallow certain objects like paper clips and human hair. The kid would poop it out into a bag and the older guy would sift through the feces like a goddamn treasure hunt for the items. He would then put them in an envelope and file them. I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR, but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious Sid's death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather an infant corpse, and several people stop by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare and my wife at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. Got a call that someone wasn't answering their phone or the doorbell. We got to the house and noticed that every window was blinded by either curtains or pieces of paper. We rang the doorbell and yelled through the litter box, but there was no answer. We opened the door and got inside. In the house, it looked like someone just had lunch. There was bread on the table and juice or milk in the glasses. Children's toys scattered all around. Then I saw a note that gave me the chills. It was a suicide note. As the door was locked from the inside, the person had to be in the house. We checked room by room and my heartbeat was at 300%. When I checked the bathroom, preparing myself for slit wrists or throats, I opened the door slowly, but there was nothing. Finally, one more room left, which was the attic. We walked slowly up the stairs, and we found the resident there, hanging from a beam. I will never forget the adrenaline I had, the scene in the living room or the resident I found. My father-in-law is a retired sheriff, and was a deputy before that. He was the first responder to an accident. A truck loaded of farm workers was coming back from the fields. The truck went over a hump in an intersection and a little girl in the back of the truck flew out and landed headfirst on the pavement. My father-in-law held her as she moaned and eventually died in his arms. He says he still hears her sounds in his head all these years later. My cousin is a cop and he responded to a call on Valentine's Day night. A 12-year-old girl called in to say her mother had blown her brains out in the living room. I guess her and her brother were getting ready for dinner and the mom just shot herself. He said the creepy thing about it was dinner all set up, drinks on the table, and suddenly she shot herself. Kids were sitting outside when he arrived. To this day I can't imagine Valentine's Day for them, but I know that is something that stuck with him, seeing that. Not a cop, but a correctional officer in Texas. One time a guy slit the forearm side of his elbows, where it bends. He laid there in a big puddle of his own blood. I was one of the responders that day. I'll never forget it. As soon as you entered the cell, the smell just hit you. Blood has a strong metallic smell, which I never realized before. He'd been lying there a while, so the blood had coagulated, which again, I did not expect. As we lifted the barely conscious guy out of the blood fell off his body in chunks, like jello. It was pretty disturbing, because I didn't expect any of it, nor was I able to mentally prepare for it. We are not really medically trained, so all of it was completely surprising to me. Not a cop myself, but my daddy's, and I asked him this one time. He told me it was when he went to this one house because a woman had called and said that men were breaking into the house. He gets there, and he said it was immediately very clear that the woman was not exactly altogether mentally. He said she kept mumbling things and was very jumpy and skittish, not to mention that every single wall of her house apparently had at least 6 or 7 crosses on it, if not more. He calms her down, checks around the house for any signs of entry or just anything weird, and there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that anyone had been trying to or had been successful in breaking in. He said she followed him around the entire time and would point to things like a door knob or window latches and say, "Oh, that's not where I left it." That's how they got in. He said the whole thing was fairly eerie, considering he was at this woman's house in the middle of the night, surrounded by crosses, and listening to her mumble on about random crap. To make her feel better, he did a sweep of the whole house to see if there was anyone else inside, which there wasn't. He said the one thing that made it creepy for him was the fact that every few minutes she'd say something like, "Oh, they're here again," or "He's right behind us. I can feel it." Ex-cop. I worked in a high-tech task force agency conducting computer forensics investigations. Lots of child porn. Lots. Anyways, we were doing a multi-agency search warrant sweep in the large metro area in California. We serve a search warrant for distributing/possessing CP at a residence in a semi-decent area, and the suspect fit the prototypical Hollywood child molester look. He lived with his disabled wife, no kids, and she had mobility issues, mostly stayed downstairs, and had not been upstairs for years. We go upstairs, and this guy has a legitimate masturbation station set up in one of the bedrooms that had an outside padlock on it. It was dark, the windows were covered, and he had baby dolls with their butts cut out all over the room and some of their mouths cut out for impromptu baby doll. Some of their heads were removed and scattered on the floor. This guy had serious issues. UK got called to assist ambulance at an address because they were struggling with a woman who'd had an apparent seizure. We got there, and she's this tiny skinny little Singaporean lady who's being held down on the floor by a paramedic. She's hissing and struggling against her, and repeatedly trying to bite the paramedic. Her eyes are all black and red, no white. It takes me £200, my partner for the evening, about £180, plus 3 paramedics to hold her down. All the time she's struggling and trying to bite with veins popping out of her neck. She's looking past us at the corner of the room screaming at something that isn't there, telling it not to kill her and us. Her husband, who seems weirdly unfazed by the whole thing, tells us this has been happening since she last went to Singapore and got sick after visiting a holy site. Usually, her sister has to stop it by putting this powder on her forehead in a cross, but unfortunately, she's out of the country. In the end, she was taken to the hospital for a mental health assessment by the paramedics. I often wonder what the outcome was, but have no way of finding out, unfortunately. My cousin is on in a major city. Apparently 911 got a call from a 6-year-old claiming vehemently that there was a zombie outside of his house on the street. So a patrol car swings around to see what's up. Turns out a tweaker on meth gouged out his own eyes, had blood dripping down from the empty sockets, and was stumbling around blindly with his hands stretched out in front of him. Goddamn. Turns out the kid was telling the truth. For some reason, the suicides always hit me the hardest. I had a good friend that killed himself in high school, so suicide is a touchy thing, not just for everyone but especially for those who have personal experience with it. I've seen 3 suicides by gun, 2 hangings, and a handful that did it intentionally by using drugs of some sort or other methods. Long story short, a guy shot himself in his garage with a .357 Magnum. I have a pretty strong stomach, thankfully because of experience, but I believe I accidentally stepped on a piece of his eye. When I cleared the call, I went straight to the locker room and cleaned the bottom of my boots for a good 40 minutes. I repeated the cleaning process at home too. Now sure, that's not exactly creepy, just disturbing. But here's this one. We get a call from the hotel off the interstate. Employees went to clean a room and found a note on the bathroom door, which was closed and locked. It read, "Don't come in. Call 911. So the front desk did just that. We get there, and she shows us the room. We try knocking on the bathroom door. No answer. We weren't even sure if there was someone in there or not. The on-site manager told us we were allowed to force entry into the bathroom. She was concerned because none of the employees ever remember the guest checking out. My partner gets the door open, and it was like something off of a horror movie. The guy was in the tub, completely naked, knife on the floor, just next to the tub, cuts on his wrists, and the absolute worst thing were the blood inside of the tub. I've never seen so much blood in my 10+ year career. His face was pale white, and it appeared as he was frowning. He didn't appear to be breathing. Call a medic, my partner says. I just look at him and say, UHH. No. Dude's dead. I'm not touching him. You can check if you want, but we need to get our supervisor, an EVT, and detective here. I could recognize a dead guy when I saw one. I get the manager, who is having a legit panic attack, to calm down and head back down to the desk while we deal with this. Called for another car and told dispatch to contact our evidence technicians and a detective when I hear my partner scream and exclaim, "Oh crap." I run back over there and he's wide-eyed staring at the body. He just moved. That alive, man. He moved. What are you talking about? He has a freaking pulse. It's faint as hell, but he has it. His leg moved under the water when I tried checking for it. Sure enough, I put on my big boy undies and could barely feel a pulse on this guy. Medic called and they rushed him to the ER. Turned out he did the cutting just minutes before the cleaning maid found the note, so surprisingly he barely lived. Got a report of a missing husband. He told his wife and family of 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but never returned, and this was 12 hours ago. They had purchased another house in a neighboring community, and the relationship with the wife was under pressure, so the wife assumed he was staying at the other house, and claimed he would never kill himself. The strange thing about this report though was that he emptied his personal bank account into his wife's this morning as well. The wife explained this off saying that they recently had a fight about finances, and he agreed that he was bad at money and maybe they should just have a joint account that she controls. On a hunch, I asked his 14-year-old boy if there were any areas in the mountains nearby that his father enjoyed going, and the son identified a road about 10 miles away. It was nearing midnight, but I decided to drive to the top of this old and abandoned Forest Service road. As I drove through the snow and started to climb the road, I felt a gut feeling that I would 100% find this guy up there either thinking about or already acted out a suicide. The snow-laid gravel road had some sign of travel, but no real indication of how fresh the vehicle tracks could be. As I reached the top of the road after an hour of travel, I was honestly surprised that I did not find his black truck. I spent the drive back down thinking about gut feelings and how they are unreliable, but that I somehow felt different about this one. As I traveled up the road, I did notice over a dozen smaller roads branching off, but they were not mapped, and I had already spent too much time on a single occurrence in a busy city with too few police officers. Nonetheless, I decided to check a single of these secondary roads, and about 3/4 of the way down I picked a road at random to check, and sure enough my headlights lit up the back end of a black truck about 100 yards past the first corner. Even if I hadn't memorized the license plate beforehand, I wouldn't have had to run it. It was clearly his. I radioed that I had found the truck, parked my vehicle, and traveled the 20 feet to his truck with my heart beating like I was doing it at a sprint rather than a normal walk. What I found inside was a mess of brains and blood caused by a self-inflicted shotgun wound under the chin. I'll save you from the description. There was just something about that gut feeling while traveling this abandoned and quiet mountain road, followed by a sense of being tricked by the gut feeling, then finding out it was true by discovering such a gruesome scene, having to wait 3 hours next to his truck waiting for body removal, and then to end it all by having to go to the family who was expecting good news to deliver to them the worst news possible. That makes me feel creeped out to this day. 2 adults reported missing. Parents of 2 adult children, 1 male, 1 female. Alerts are in place for the missing people's credit cards. The father's credit card hits on a purchase at a jewelry store where an engagement ring was purchased. It leads us to the son, who made the purchase of the ring. Son is questioned and confessed to killing both parents and burying them in shallow graves. The son led us to the gravesite and we began the process of recovery. Both mom and dad had black garbage bags over their heads, being held in place by duct tape around their necks. The sight of the bodies, especially their faces, once the bags were removed, and the smell is something I'll never forget. His parents were drunks and lived an alternative lifestyle. On the night he killed them, he said his dad tore into him pretty good, calling him a loser this and a loser that. He was a mistake, shouldn't have been born. But he said what threw him over the edge was his dad calling him a half a man. He flew into a rage and choked him out. Mom watched and did nothing. She realizes dad is dead and says something to the effect that dad was right about him and son gave it to her too. Girlfriend helped clean up the bodies and dispose of them. She flipped and testified. I was called out to negotiate with a 17-year-old female who had barricaded herself in a bathroom with multiple knives and scissors. She done it right too. SWAT ended up going through the sheetrock wall. She wouldn't talk with me at all but had multiple graphic conversations with her mother, who committed suicide 3 years earlier, and her dad, who's serving lots of years in prison for sexually abusing her. When SWAT pulled her out, she had completed multiple circumcisions on herself with the scissors, completely cut her nipples off, and had sodomized herself multiple times with multiple steak knives. The kicker was, she was talking the whole time and her tone or volume never changed. The pain never bothered her. Or, more likely, she never felt it. The human mind is scary AF. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, hit like, get subscribed, and tell us which story was the creepiest in the comment section, and support the original writers with upvotes. Links in the description box.